Very good. So the point of this little card is it gives you a bit of entertainment. You get to look at something pretty. So this is being done by a Bhikkhuni friend, Ayya Vimalanyani, and she's done hundreds and hundreds of drawings, and they usually illustrate something from the Suttas, the teachings of the Buddha. So this card is a picture of 3 monks that I'm going to talk about in a little while. And just to read the back on the left-hand side there, I'll read it out for us so we can all hear, and this will help us with our meditation. When people live in harmony, appreciating each other without quarrelling, blending like milk and water, and regarding each other with kindly eyes, it's a good time for meditation. So today's talk is about harmony and happiness. So the 2 contemplations that we just did are a good way to start thinking about what it means to live with others. The Buddha said that it is an incredible thing when one person is grateful for the kindness shown to them by another. An even more incredible thing is when that person, having experienced kindness, feeling gratitude, wants to repay that forward to someone else. So this is an important part of the Buddha's path. If you receive goodness and kindness, then you give goodness and kindness, and the more you give goodness and kindness to others, the more you receive back. So it's like this cycle, wonderful cycle of good things going around in the world. And I think it's very important for us as Buddhists or people who are interested in Buddhism, or people who are just interested in meditation, I don't make any assumptions here, that we understand that there are ideals and there are realities. Sometimes as Buddhists we get confused. Are we living the ideal, or are we confusing ourselves? Are we blinding ourselves to the reality? And the reason I talk like this is because one of the practices we most commonly do as Buddhists is the practice of metta. So this is the practice of loving kindness. And you'd think that if all the Buddhists were practicing loving kindness all the time in utter perfection, there would be no problems in the world, no problems in Buddhist organizations. You'd get out of here, there'd be rose petals falling from the sky, lights flashing up, you'd be on the train just beaming love. This is an ideal. The reality sometimes can be a little bit different. So if we're thinking about harmony and happiness, if we're thinking about our interactions with others, our relationships, our work life, our family life, friends, all of these things, if we say that we're practicing metta and yet we get upset easily, or we get angry, or we hate people, then perhaps it's not as pure as you might have thought. And that's okay. It's okay. It's important, though, to recognize that. We don't want to delude ourselves that we're sending loving kindness to the whole world, except for your husband. Except for that person who bumped into you at the station. Except for that colleague at work. We don't want to delude ourselves into thinking that we're somewhere spiritually that we're not. Does this make sense to you? So we're going to have to do a little bit more when it comes to creating good relationships with those people around us than just sitting down practicing metta. The metta needs to show up somewhere in our interactions with people. And one of the things that gives me great comfort is that we're all faking it, and eventually, hopefully, we can make it. But even at the time of the Buddha, there was a lot of problems, and this makes me smile so much. You know, there was the Buddha, all of these enlightened beings around him, a wonderful large Sangha of monks and nuns, and still they fought like cats and dogs. And you think, well, maybe they just weren't pure enough. Maybe they didn't try hard enough. Maybe it's hard to have harmony. Maybe it's difficult to have peace and security in the world. Maybe we've got a long way to go. And there's a famous incident that I often think about whenever I see a bit of tension in the Sangha, a little bit of conflict in a Buddhist organization, and it's the incident at Kosambi. Do any of you know about this incident? So, the monks were fighting. They were fighting, the Buddha said in this sutta, the Upakkilesa Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 128, that they were fighting with words like daggers, hurting each other with words like daggers. And they just couldn't agree about anything. They couldn't come to a place of harmony, of even kindness or niceness. And the Buddha kept on trying to intervene because, he's the Buddha. So he kept on trying to intervene. But these monks, you'd think they would be all respectful and like, oh, the Buddha says this. But no, they were like, keep out of it. We're sorting it out. And the Buddha was like, okay, well, and he tried again. And he tried a third time, and they were like, no. And so eventually he was like, right, whatever. And he walked away and went to the forest and went on retreat. So I think there's two things I take away from this. One thing is, if you want to get along well with people, run away to the forest and hide. Maybe it's the only way. But if that's not possible, then what do we do? So the story continues, and there's a cycle of suttas, 3 different suttas that kind of draw out little parts of this story. So the Buddha left, and he left them to fight. We don't even know what they were fighting about. Maybe by the time they recorded this sutta, they couldn't even remember. Who knows? And so the Buddha went away, and there's another sutta which gives us a little bit of hope. So we've got the bad example, these monks at Kosambi who just couldn't get along. And then we have the Buddha encountering 3 monks dwelling together. And their names were Anuruddha, Kimbala, and Nandya. Perhaps some of you have already heard about this sutta. It's called the Cūḷagosiṅga Sutta, MN 31. And it's a sutta that talks about harmony. It's not the sutta that's written on the back here, so that might be a little bit confusing. So the background to this sutta is this incident at Kosambi, this fight between these monks. And then he comes across these good practicing monks, Anuruddha, Kimbala and Nandya, and he says, how are you getting along? How are things going? Are you dwelling in harmony? Are you blending like water and milk? Are you looking at each other with eyes of love? So this is a beautiful line from the Cūḷagosiṅga Sutta, which is also echoed in this quote from the Anguttara Nikaya on the back of this card. So he's asking, are you getting along? Please be getting along. And Anuruddha, who's like the head monk there, says yes. So the Buddha's probably quite happy to hear that, given that other monks were being so badly behaved. And so he says, how are you getting along so well? And Anuruddha says, well, I practice bodily acts of kindness, of metta, towards the 2 monks that I live with, both in public and in private. I practice acts of verbal kindness towards these monks, in public and in private. And I practice mental acts of kindness, of metta, towards these monks, both in public and in private. So these things, body, speech and mind, are pretty important parts of the Buddha's path. And they're also parts of the Noble Eightfold Path. And they're also, in some ways, reflected in our precepts as well. And so the Buddha follows up with another question. He says, well, how are you practicing acts of bodily kindness? And it's actually pretty simple. You might be thinking, oh, they're saving baby ducklings from falling out of trees or whatever. But no, it's actually really boring. Anuruddha says, well, we go out to alms round, we go out in Pintapata, and the first one who's back, they put out the water for washing the feet. They get the water for washing the bowls. They sweep the dining hall, and whoever gets there later, they put things away, and someone cleans out the toilets. And it's so boring, yeah? So boring. But these are acts of kindness. Domestic kindness. How often in your lives have you had trouble in your home because someone just doesn't even think to wash the dishes? Because someone doesn't care to clean the toilet, doesn't pick up after themselves? These are not acts of bodily kindness. And so when I think about this idea of harmony, getting along with people, actually caring about the people around you and doing something about it in these really small ways is conducive to harmony, conducive to affection, conducive to a sense of unity, cohesion. We're in this together. It's conducive to non-dispute. You're not going to argue if it's your turn to do the dishes or to take the bins out. You do it, and you don't argue about it. Everyone's happy. It's so simple, isn't it? This is what the Buddha says is conducive to harmony. This is a beginning place for us to think about bodily actions, our bodily actions. So it's not only what we do. I mean, these were arahants, these monks, so they know how to clean up after themselves. It's not only what we do, it's what we don't do. So what's the opposite of acts of bodily kindness? It's those things maybe that's concerned with our precepts, like killing. If you're going to be killing all the insects or ducklings or other people, then you can't be practicing acts of bodily kindness, can you? So if you're stealing from someone, using your body to take from another person, then that's not an act of bodily kindness either. If you are not observing restraint in your sexual conduct and you commit sexual misconduct, this is not an act of bodily loving kindness. So you see how not only are these ideas what we're doing, but what we're not doing as well. So all the problems in the world could be solved if people stopped stealing from each other, stopped hurting each other, and did the dishes. Maybe. Something for us to think about. When we think about Buddhism, sometimes we have these very highfalutin, like the whole world kind of, but the place that we really need to practice metta is in our homes, with the people that we live with, at work, at school, at uni. These are the places that our metta needs to show up. So this is a very important feature, this mundane banality of kindness. That if we look after each other, we can have harmony in our lives. So the second one was verbal kindness, acts of verbal kindness. And of course these are the 4 types of right speech or the 4 types of wrong speech, depending on how you want to look at it. So most of us know the precepts, the the idea that we don't lie. But there's some other aspects to wrong speech that we can also look at. So that the first one is, of course, we don't tell lies. So what we have instead is truthfulness, yeah? So we don't lie about taking the garbage out. Yes, I've done it, when we haven't. We tell the truth. No, I haven't. Sometimes telling the truth is difficult. But lies are what causes disharmony the most. So we tell difficult truths sometimes with kindness, but we don't try to hide something from others or from ourselves. The second aspect of wrong speech is divisive speech. So this is speech that separates people from each other. Basically, kind of like bitching, gossiping, slandering, putting people against each other. Oh, did you hear what she did? Or she really hates you, you know. So this is a kind of speech which divides people. We want to have speech that unites people, that brings people together to create harmony. So when we speak, we should have speech that produces togetherness, that doesn't separate others, that is harmonious, that brings unity. So instead of complaining about so-and-so, we talk about their good qualities. If someone that we're with starts complaining about such and such a person, we point out that person's good qualities. We say, hey, you should look at these good qualities in them, bringing them closer together, reminding them of the aspect of them that they haven't seen. So this is another aspect of speech that we can practice that produces harmony rather than disunity. A third aspect of speech, something that we can take on, is harsh speech. So this is a problem for us. This is wrong speech, harsh speech, speech that borders on anger, that hurts people. These daggers, these words that are like daggers, that cut without blood. So if we speak harshly to someone, we're not practicing a mind of kindness. We're hurting them. Hurting people is not likely to produce harmony. It's not likely to improve your interactions with others. We know this from experience. Have you taken the bins out? No. You stupid idiot! Why haven't you? Just creates more problems, yeah? The more we yell and scream, the more they yell and scream back at us. We get into this cycle of anger, and it can escalate very quickly into some horrible, horrible interactions with other people. So we restrain our speech. If we're not careful, if we allow our speech to become harsh, angry, hurtful, who knows what can happen? You could say something irreparable. You could say something you regret, and this is going to cause a lot of agitation in your mind. It's going to cause a lot of problems in your relationships. There's going to be reverberations that continue. Even more importantly, the amount of people who have had fights only to have their loved ones very soon after die in a car crash, and they never got to heal that. There's something I often think about when I hear these stories, actually, that you should never leave a situation like that. Always try to repair it. If you've said something that's hurtful, that's harsh, who knows if you'll ever see this person again? And that could be the last thing that you'll ever said to them. So it's worth remembering, try to repair these things as quickly as you can. And so instead of harsh, angry words towards each other, what's going to produce conducive harmony in your relationships? The opposite, yeah? Kind words, gentle words, words that go to the heart, words that are pleasing to hear, words that make people happy. So this is something that we can practice all the time. You don't have to become an annoying, sycophantic flatterer. Just compliment people for their good qualities. Talk to them gently. Try not to make them angry. Try not to be angry yourself. And this is something that, if we practice, is a very attractive quality. It brings people to us, you know. They know that if they've done something bad, they're not going to get yelled at. You're kind, you're compassionate, you're peaceful in the way that you deal with that. So this is another aspect. But the last aspect to wrong speech is just incoherent babble, nonsense talk, probably most of the internet. So, and actually something that we do in our lives, have you noticed this? Sometimes we just talk about anything and everything just to fill up the space so that we don't have that awkward silence. There's something there that tells us that we're not in harmony with ourselves, with others, you know. If we're uncomfortable, if we're feeling that the silence is oppressive, then it's telling us something. If we're just trying to fill up this void with nonsense just to keep that feeling of uncomfortableness at bay, then there's something wrong. Maybe, in order to get along better with others, we speak less frequently, but about more important things. Or we speak more carefully to each other. We speak in ways that are useful, that are going to help us come out of our ignorance, come out of our suffering, come out of problematic situations, and lead towards more peace, more happiness, more contentment. These are the things that we can talk about, rather than, you know, the kind of nonsense we spend most of our day talking about. So this is verbal acts of loving kindness that we can practice with each other. And the third one is mental acts of loving kindness towards each other, both in public and in private. So this is the interesting part of that refrain that occurs throughout this sutta. In public and in private, mental acts of loving kindness. It's easy to perform loving kindness. You can do it. But then, when you step away into the privacy of your own room, or drive away in your car, and you're thinking, oh, well, he's like this, not consistent, not authentic. So loving kindness is the absence of hatred. And there's many ways that we want to develop this in our interactions, and there's many reasons to do that. Basically, humans are complex, relationships are difficult, but the mind is actually quite simple. It can't really do more than one thing at a time. So if you've got a mind of loving kindness, that's what you've got, a mind of loving kindness. If you've got a mind of hate, of irritation, of resentment, of anger, of, I need some help here. Isn't that enough? Of jealousy, of indignation, of envy, of covetousness, of controlling someone to do what you want them to do. A mind like this is not a mind of loving kindness. So, because the mind is simple, and because the Buddha was wise, he said, have a mind of loving kindness in public and private. So this is, again, is the ideal. But because human relationships are complex, it's okay. If something appears in your mind and it's not loving kindness, what do? What do you do? Do you go with it?
Just recognize it and see if you can step
Recognizing,
away.
yeah. So being aware of our mind state is really important. And this is what we develop through the practice of meditation. So when you sit there and you're sitting with the mind, you've got nowhere to run, you've got no distraction, you've got no television, no computer in front of you, no one to keep the silence at bay, no one looking inside your mind. Then, when you are aware of the activity of your mind, you can see what's going on. And so you can see when these mind states of anger, hatred, irritability, jealousy, covetousness, all of those mind states, they have a particular quality in the mind. And when you see them, as one monk I was speaking to just recently, he was like, oh yeah, these people who think they're so pure, they should just let their defilements dance in front of them for a little bit. And then when these defilements are dancing in front of you, you can see what it's like to have that mindset. So when this thing comes into your mind, you don't push it away and stomp on it or pretend it's not there. I'm metta. You have to understand what's going on to see how it's affecting you. Then, with wisdom, you'll recognize its drawbacks. Recognizing its drawbacks means it's easy to let go. Eventually, understanding this process, we train the mind. Anger is coming. Hang on a second. Anger is not cool. Anger feels like this. Resentment is here. Okay, that's that problematic state of mind. Recognizing it, we can let it go. So this is something that we can do in terms of our mental development that will create harmony. Why? Because you may have experienced this already. When we have practiced metta, when we do have a mind full of love, even when you run into that problematic person, the mind of metta can continue, and that interaction can be fundamentally different, because your mental cultivation of metta means that you carry that into new situations. So the more you practice metta, the more you dwell in metta, the more the mind becomes saturated with this quality. And the more saturation of metta you have, the more likely when you're confronted with a difficult person, a difficult situation, that mind of metta will just persist, keep on carrying along, and you can deal with problems in a much more skillful way. Anger will maybe appear in the mind for a few moments and disappear, swamped by this beautiful metta. This is the whole point of practicing the Brahma Viharas. This is the reason we practice these beautiful states of mind, is to become like a lake of cool, calm, wet metta, a torch of grass coming, a hot, fiery torch of anger. It just cannot burn us. We put that fire out really quickly. So this is why the Buddha recommended cultivating acts of body, verbal and mental kindness towards others. These three aspects that the Buddha pointed out in this sutta actually fit into another sutta which talk about these 6 principles of cordiality. Cordiality means like harmony, getting along, being peaceful and harmonious with others. So there's 3 other aspects which I want to just go through very quickly, which complete this series of 6 aspects. So the first 3, body, verbal, mental acts of loving kindness. The next 3 are generosity. So generosity is pretty easy, isn't it? Like if you want people to like you, if you want a sense of harmony, you give them something. Gave you a card. I saw this working in a workplace where there was a bit of a toxic culture and no one got along, everyone hated each other, and it's pretty awful. But then one person started to bake cakes, and she would bring it into the office and give it to people. She would go around, offer them cake. This single act of generosity gave her an opportunity to have positive interactions with other people. It gave them an opportunity to see her in a different way. Oh, she's not that annoying person in accounting. She's the one who gives us cake. Humans are pretty simple. If you be generous and kind, they like it. It's going to create good, harmonious relationships in your life. If you are kind to people, if you are generous to people, if you do the dishes and take the garbage out as an act of kindness, of generosity, of love, it is going to make your life better, more harmonious. So this is generosity. And this is, of course, the practice that we contemplated earlier on. And so you can see how our meditation practice, this practice of recollecting, fits in to our real life of doing these acts of kindness, of generosity. And the next one, number 5 on this list, is the practice of sila. And that's what we did also earlier on, kind of smashed it together a little bit, talked about virtue and the precepts. And this is an opportunity for us to practice acts of bodily kindness by practicing sila. This is the morality aspect of Buddhist practice. This is the precepts. So if you don't kill, like we talked about this with the precepts that we took. You don't kill, don't steal, don't commit sexual misconduct, you don't lie, and you don't get intoxicated. These things are going to create harmony in your life. So these precepts are acts of loving kindness towards others. If you're not killing the cockroaches, you are being kind towards them. You are practicing metta towards them. If you're not stealing from people, then you are practicing kindness. They can trust you. This is a beautiful quality. So all the precepts are like this. They have these beautiful effects, not only for yourself, but for others. And as a basis of harmony, they're very profound. These have very profound consequences for our own practice, but also our interactions with others. And the last principle of cordiality, this sixth principle, the most important principle, and unfortunately the one I'm going to spend the least time on, is cultivating right view. So right view is a complicated Buddhist term, samaditi. It's about seeing the Four Noble Truths. That's the truth of suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path leading to the cessation of suffering. So the cessation of suffering basically is just telling us, hey, there is suffering, but there is an end to suffering. There is, unhappiness, dukkha, and there is sukha, happiness, a way to come out of it. So we come out of our suffering. This is the whole of the Buddhist path. So if our relationships are unharmonious, if our marriage is full of hate and aggression, or our friendships are tortured, or our work life is terrible, it's okay. There's still hope. We have a pathway to come out of this suffering, and that is the Buddhist Eightfold Noble Path, which contains things like those precepts, like those aspects of right speech, which contains things like our bodily actions, and also the samadhi aspect, the mental cultivation, and the view that things are, difficult, but we can change them. They can get better. We can come out of our suffering, which is the most important part of the Buddhist spiritual practice. And that's why in this sutta, the Kosambiya Sutta, the Buddha refers to it as the pinnacle of a house. So it's like the thing that holds the house up. The most important part is this right view, but it's another talk of its own. And I'll just say one more thing before I stop with this short discussion, and that is back to the postcard, back to this image of these three monks. Anuruddha said when the Buddha asked him, how are you getting along? How are you doing this? How's your relationships? He said, well, what I do is these acts of bodily, verbal and mental kindness towards others. And I say to myself, what do these venerable monks want to do? Why don't I just do as they wish? Why don't I just go along with them and they do whatever they want? So this, I'm sure those people who've been married a long time, is a strategy for successful, harmonious relationships. Whatever, dear. Whatever you want to do, let's do that. I'm making it sound a bit trite, but this is renunciation. This is letting go. This is stepping back. This is not trying to control others, not trying to impose your will, not trying to make the world as you wish it to be, but just saying, okay, whatever, I'm cool with whatever you want to do, doesn't bother me. And it's this renunciation, for those who know the Eightfold Noble Path, Samma Sankappa, right intention, right thought. If we practice renunciation, letting go, then we can get towards those other aspects of right intention, which are the non-ill will, that's the metta, and the non-harm, that's the compassion. So by practicing whatever you want, dear, everything's okay with me, whatever you wish to do, we are actually working towards beautiful mind states of metta. We're actually working towards compassion. Because if you've got only your own self-interest in your mind, then you don't practice kindness, you don't practice compassion. You're only concerned with yourself. But if you let go of your own selfish motivations and interests, then you can work towards caring about other people, practicing metta, practicing compassion in your bodily actions, in your verbal actions, in your mental actions, being kind and generous to them, practicing in a way that protects them through the precepts. And all of this stuff will help you lead your way on the spiritual path towards right view, to the cessation of suffering, and towards nibbana. And so that's why it's very important for us to practice harmonious relationships. And I offer these few words and reflections to you today, and I hope they'll be of some benefit to you.